The podcast produced by young people for young people about the world of sustainability. We talk with leading professionals and change makers about what it takes to build a more sustainable present and future, sharing the stories, tips, and insights for you to take action. My name is Milly, and I'll be co-hosting today's episode with Logan. Today we'll be talking all about climate policy, a topic that we both find fascinating. Global climate policy plays an incredibly important role in global efforts to decarbonize our economies and societies, but also has huge impacts at regional, national, and local level. So we're so excited to be able to talk more about climate policy with our special guest, Emma Heiling. Emma is the founder of this and the CEO of ClimaTalk, a youth-led non-profit organization formed of around 100 young volunteers who are demystifying climate policy and amplifying young people's voices in the fight against climate crisis. So Emma, can you please tell us more about your background?
Hi everyone, it's lovely to be here, and thank you so much for the introduction, Milly. Yeah, so I am Emma. I'm the founder of ClimaTalk, and I'm originally from Austria, from Vienna. My background is in law, economics, environment and policy. So I did my undergrad in Cambridge in a combination of law, economics and environment, and then I took a gap year where I focused mostly on setting up ClimaTalk and did some other youth environmental volunteering roles as well as other internships in the climate action and climate policy space. And in the last 2 years, next to running ClimaTalk, I did my master's in environmental policy in Paris at Sciences Po, and I just finished and I'm now back in Vienna, back home. And thank you also for providing the introduction to ClimaTalk. Maybe to give a brief overview of what we do. Our goal is to demystify climate policy and make it accessible and transparent for young people, and thereby empowering them to take action and fight against the climate crisis and fight for climate action specifically. The way we do that is we have a running publication of short and accessible articles written by young people, for young people, and also edited and scientifically referenced. And so far we have written about 400 articles in different climate policy areas and addressing various climate policy topics. And next to that we have 6 projects, 3 in the area of climate policy and law. For example, our COP project, where we've reported live from the past 2 climate conferences, so COP26 and COP27, as well as the intersessional conference in Bonn that happened in June, as well as our EU policy project and youth climate lawsuits database. And then we have 3 projects in the area of climate education and careers, where, for example, we've developed a university courses map with now around 400 uni courses in the area of climate and environmental policy, as well as already quite a few individual student reviews for those courses, helping young people find the right university course in the environmental and climate policy area.
Cool, thank you so much. So Emma, welcome to the podcast. We're very excited to have you. Maybe we could start by talking about the role of government in terms of solving the climate crisis we are in now. Do you think government intervention is the only way out of the climate crisis? As you know, different corporate, they have different kinds of intentions. So is government intervention the best way?
That's an excellent question. Thank you so much, Milly. I think the clearest answer is that government intervention is not enough, but we cannot do it without it, because we need systemic transformation, and governments have the power, the resources, and the influence to not only enact policies and regulations, but also to direct funding and investments also for the private sector. So there's a huge overlap in that area. Provide international examples and also orient the populations as well as the media's attention to the most important issues. And therefore, government policies, the key pillar when it comes to rapid and transformative climate action, and governments must assume their responsibility in that area.
Yes, I think that's actually a really good point, because there's many sectors in our economy and in our society, so you can't work it without being government imposing those rules. Do you think the global climatic policies are working well? Is there any specifically countries that you nominate that has the best policies?
That's a great question. Generally, assessing the effectiveness of global climate policies is very complex, and it's an ongoing challenge, because climate policy covers so many different areas and so many different topics. I'd go as far as saying that almost every policy is actually a climate policy, or should actually be a climate policy, because since we need a systemic transformation, it affects every area of society and every area of our system. But in short, no, they are not working well, since we are nowhere close to achieving the goals set out in the Paris Agreement, and the CO2 emissions have kept rising. If you look at the current policies that are defined as climate policies, if implemented, would result in a global average warming of like 2.5 to 2.9 degrees Celsius by the end of the century, which is far from what is needed, and that's only under the condition that they're actually working and implemented. And if you check the website, for example, of the Climate Action Tracker, you can see which countries are highly insufficient, which are way too many, in their climate policies, and which are almost sufficient. There is no country that is actually sufficient. Not all countries have data, so there are a couple of countries that, especially those where the responsibility is very low, and rather the consequences that they're suffering are very high, where also some data is lacking. But generally, most countries' climate policies are insufficient. And it's not enough, for example, if a country says it's going to invest in renewable energy, but at the same time keeps up the exploration of oil and gas. So one counterexample is the Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance that was set up by Denmark and Costa Rica, which is like a good practice example in which countries pledge to stop exploration for new oil and gas fields. And for example, Costa Rica has extended its like national moratorium on oil exploration and exploitation from 2021 to 2050. But even in this setting, both countries have since backed away a little bit, because Costa Rica refrained from prioritizing it at COP27 after a change in their government, and Denmark actually launched what they called mini, under quotes, oil and gas licensing round in the North Sea just now in July 2023, despite being one of the founding members of this alliance. So there's a lot of back and forth, and even like 2 steps forward and then 1 step back. So there is no country that is doing an amazing job in climate policy.
I really agree with you that you said that earlier, that every social policies and public policies require to be part of the climate policies, because it's just like when you're building something, you certainly need some rules to make the project more sustainable.
Yeah, so going on, yeah, I just want to add on, thank you for your very informative sharing. And so I was wondering, from what you said, apparently there is a lack of consistency with what the government has set for policy, and also their actions in terms of carrying out these policies. So my main question was, do you think the problem with the inconsistency in terms of climate policies would be that the problem of carrying out these policies or the setting out of the policy?
I think it's both. I think there is big inconsistency in terms of what countries claim that they're doing, in terms of what countries are actually doing, in terms of where countries try to direct the attention, and in what they're doing behind the scenes in different areas, because it's often there are some big words and big statements, but when you look where the actual money flows, it's back into fossil fuels, it's back into unsustainable practices, and they have a couple of projects that they highlight as examples. So I think that is definitely one key issue, is this lack of consistency, but also lack of seriousness, I may even say, because it seems like most countries are not taking climate policy and climate action seriously enough. And what the second thing that you said about the actual policies, that's also definitely an issue, because we need ambitious policies, but people always say ambitious policies, but actually we only need appropriate policies, which are not that ambitious in our current situation. They are very transformative and they're systemic, but they are just the appropriate measure, and right now we're very far from the appropriate measure that we would need.
Yeah, and I also think that many policies are struggling at the legislating stage, because many industries are deep in the politics, and those industries might think that their benefits are being threatened. So in some sense, I think that's also part of the reason.
That's definitely a very important point, and lobbying and anti-climate lobbying is huge from different industries, be it the fossil fuel industry, be it the agriculture industry. And just at COP27 alone, we had 636 fossil fuel lobbyists at COP27, which is insane in its own.
Yeah. Emma, do you think that as a young people, what can we do to help our countries to achieve their aims?
As a young person, we don't shoulder the responsibility because we were not responsible for what is currently unfolding on the planet. However, since we are living in this very crucial moment in time, and this is really the decisive decade even that we are currently experiencing, because we are going towards so many potential tipping points that will be crucial. These years are actually so important, and everybody who somehow has the opportunity or the possibility to be active has a responsibility to actually do something. So the first thing I would say is to stop being a passive onlooker onto what's happening, because I think many people see what's happening but they don't know what to do, and start becoming an active citizen. And this means actively participating in protests, in community organizing, in actually calling out governments, calling out media, write to your local representative, write to your media stations if they're reporting on the climate in a way that is not reflective of the crisis, or if they're not reporting at all. Go vote if you're able to vote, or definitely vote. Organize in your school, in your university. Try and get together communities of people, get other people involved. Try and see where the key leverage points are in the system that you're currently in, because I quite like the definition of choice architects. This comes from the book Nudge by Cass Sunstein and Richard Thaler, and it's about behavioral economics. But what I'm getting at is that everybody is a choice architect in the system that they're in. And so this could be, you are influencing a bunch of people, and there are different points where you could change the system and the direction of the system for many people. So this could, one of the examples that they name is, the people who are deciding what's offered in the school or university canteen. This is much more powerful to change this than to try and convince everybody that is eating at the canteen to choose the more sustainable option. It is way more powerful to change the actual offering and go to the actual choice architects behind that setting. And this is kind of what I'm trying to encourage everyone to do, is where is your area of influence, and really find that and try and influence the mini system in that area, because that way we can work towards a much bigger change and much bigger transformation.
Yeah, thank you very much. I do agree with you, and I believe that's the ultimate objective of ClimaTalk and SustainAPod, to just share more about the climate issue and to channel out this information about the climate issue, so that the general public, and especially for the younger people, that we will actually care more about these and actually learn more about the policy, so that in the future, when we have become the major stakeholders in terms of fighting against the climate issue, then us as young people will know what to do and where the earth is going, basically. So just to the next thing, so to a more specific problem that we're facing. So as we've already mentioned in the introduction, we have been studying in the UK, so there have been many developments in the EU regionally regarding the climate policy. So one of the key challenges we have seen on our side of the world is the cost of living crisis stemming from the Russian invasion of Ukraine earlier last year. So it has led to a renewed focus on some local and national issues such as housing, employment, energy security, etc. So I was wondering how do you think this is affecting the environmental or climate related policy making, specifically in the EU?
That's a very interesting question, and definitely crucial in what's been happening the past few years. And you've really seen a couple of big shifts. Shift number one is there's been a shift in priorities, because often during crises, governments prioritize what seem like immediate concerns at the expense of those that seem more complex or that seem further away. Although as we have very much experienced this summer once again, the climate crisis is very much not in the future and very much in the present. But if there is something as immediate and as directly affecting each and every citizen, then this often gets the attention of the government as well as funding, and there's much less discussion around the need to help people out of this crisis. This also affects resource allocation, this affects the delay of policies in other areas, this generally affects public opinion because people usually only care about so many issues, like you can't care about everything, and so if there is a couple of issues that are on your mind constantly, then you will have less space to worry about issues that are currently not as present in your lives or in your country. And this goes back to what I was saying previously, is that it hasn't quite arrived yet that actually every policy should be a climate policy, and that it shouldn't be, shall we focus on the climate crisis or shall we focus on the cost of living crisis? No, everything is connected, and we need to build in climate in every single policy. So this is really this shift that we've noticed, but there would be many opportunities to also build in climate and to try and come out of this crisis more resilient in terms of the climate crisis as well, and achieve more public awareness and kind of recover from this crisis with a more resilient system and use this as an opportunity for systemic transformation. But it hasn't quite arrived at most governments yet how much we need to include and consider climate in these spaces.
Which kind of challenges and opportunities do you think it offers, from the Ukraine war that we were just talking about?
Yeah, maybe expanding a little bit on my previous answer, I think it definitely offers, the whole issue of energy security was very much highlighted in this crisis, and this would also be an opportunity to move away from fossil gas, to move towards renewables. But so far, this transformative shift has not happened. Resilience and an increase of resilience, because the entire cost of living crisis can be intertwined with climate resilience efforts and investments in infrastructure, for example, that can withstand climate impacts, looking at adaptation measures such as floods, extreme weather events. They can enhance the long-term resilience and address the cost of living crisis whilst also addressing the immediate climate challenges. And lastly, also just general public awareness, because economic discussions and economic challenges can prompt many discussions about environmental sustainability and also responsibility, because economic policy and climate policy is very much intertwined and should at least be very much intertwined, which it isn't, unfortunately, in many cases. But the minute we realize that we are dependent on our climate for everything and for all economic activity, that is the moment when we must realize, and many people have realized it, unfortunately many people in power have not or do not want to realize that this is the basis for all economic activity. And so all crises could offer the opportunity to transform the system more radically than we could in a non-crisis situation. But of course, there are also many challenges that come with it, and it's not easy dealing with such an immediate crisis that you did not expect in that way and to unfold in that way. So there is also always this shift of priorities and pouring everything into this one thing without considering the bigger picture and the other crises that must be addressed at the same time.
Yeah, I can see how the cost of living crisis and the transforming to a cleaner energy resources, they go so well together. It just made me feel that it's always economics who's ruining everything.
Yeah, to add on Logan's point, I really like what Emma has talked about, how people's attention span is short. People can't focus on one issue. There's this new Russian invasion Ukraine issue, then people might forget about the climate issue and stuff. So it's about people's attention span to the issue. It's a new challenge for the government and also the government for setting out the climate policy, because people get bored and people get ignorant. People have been talking about climate issues for years and years, so people might get bored about it. So I was wondering, do you think, how should climate policy be structured in a better way so as to address the concerns about the cost to the customers and industry, and how should like this information presentation be played out in a better way so that like the general public would be accepting of these kind of climate policy but not like avoiding it?
That's a great question. That's a huge issue at the moment. One point that I would say immediately is that currently there is always a lot of discussion around the cost of action, but there is barely any discussion about the cost of inaction, because the cost of inaction when it comes to climate policies is so much higher, almost unimaginable, than the cost of action. And if we shift this viewpoint around and we look at the cost of inaction, how much we would save by acting now, this would be the first point, especially in addressing economic concerns. The second point is that policies are often formulated, or at least conveyed, in a matter that seems like it's taking things away from people. It's people have to sacrifice themselves, have to sacrifice their well-being for the climate, when in fact it is the exact opposite. We are giving people the chance to have well-being in the future and to be able to live on a planet in the future that is habitable with a climate that we can live in. And this should be conveyed as the main policy in like national interest, everybody's interest. And it's not trying to take things away from people, but we need to communicate policies in a way that has been developed in the sense that we want a positive future, and that we are considering social inequalities, that we are considering that we need a transformation that is just, that we need a transformation that is fair. But at the end, everybody's well-being will be increased, because we cannot live on a planet where we've endured 1,000 climate catastrophes, but we need to adapt and we need to mitigate. So this is a key aspect. And when it comes to political viability, engaging with different stakeholders is key, because many of the stakeholders now that think that may have to undergo a more extreme transformation than other sectors, right now they're opposed to climate action. This could be, for example, the agriculture lobby, the farming lobby. They are one of the main opposition in many countries to climate action, whereas in fact they are one of the first ones to be suffering the consequences. Actually, climate policies are policies saving the national farms, are policies saving the national agriculture, because the insurance companies have even started adapting what they're paying for, because the damages have increased by that much. And obviously governments need to assist in the transformation, but in the end it is a policy that is for those stakeholders, and we need to work with those stakeholders to actually look for a solution that works for everyone, and also that they have agency in. And just as a little side note, I'm very interested in the concept of citizens' climate assemblies, which is what I wrote my master's thesis on. And in this setting, you have citizens selected at random to participate in an assembly, where they then at the end come up with recommendations for their governments. And I looked at 6 different assemblies in Europe, and also looked at others that have happened as well. And the common ground is that those citizens that have been educated at the beginning of the assembly, so that everybody is on the same knowledge level and there's level of understanding, but come from different aspects of society, all of them have come up with recommendations that go far beyond what any of their governments have suggested, and that also receive far more public support, because it's a lot less party political and polarized, because it's a representation of the society that has come up with these suggestions. And I think this really goes in line with the stakeholder engagement that is needed. And finally, also including climate policy in all policies could potentially address the issue that people don't want to think about climate all the time, that people get tired of thinking of climate policies and debating climate policies, because if it's automatically included in every policy consideration as just a normal consideration, that of course we're taking this into account, of course we are adapting this policy to fit what we need to do for climate, then it wouldn't be such an added topic, but it would be included in all layers of society and all layers of policy making.
That's really interesting. I really like your point about like how diversifying like the public participation in terms of climate policies and also the citizen assembly. Like I think it's really good that people are actually trying to include all the stakeholders in terms of this issue so that like everyone could have a say in this issue. And also I really like how you talk about policy per se is a kind of limitation. It's kind of like a punishment to the general public. That's why people have been avoiding it. That's why people like has a negative feeling about it. So maybe the government should reconsider carrot and stick issue, like when should they give out incentives and when should the punishment be set out. So I think that's really valuable things that we've discussed. So Logan, do you want to wrap this up?
Emma, do you have any advice for students who are considering to study environmental policy in the future, like as a major, as a course, as a program?
Yeah, I mean, advice number one would be to check out our university courses map on our ClimaTalk website, because we have put in a lot of effort to research many different courses, also in different areas of policy and in different areas of environmental studies. So do check that out, and we are working on a brand new update to include, again, many more courses, and do also let us know in case that has not been included. And I think even if you are currently at university and you are not studying climate or environmental policy, and you think that you want to get involved in climate policy, don't be discouraged, because you do not need to have studied environmental science or environmental policy to then work for climate. This is a myth that has lasted for a very long time, but we need all different skills in climate policy and in the fight for climate action. This is a systems transformation. In our ClimaTalk team alone of volunteers, we need people with a legal background, we need people with a technical background, we need people with a communications background, we need people with a research background, we need people with a language and literature background to assess the understanding of our articles. And we need so many different skills, and this is just in our team alone. So please don't think that you cannot work in climate if you haven't studied climate or environmental policy. You can absolutely work in climate, and I encourage everyone who has the chance to please try and orient your career towards working for climate. And this can be in different ways and in different organizations, different institutions, different positions. And even the type of work doesn't necessarily have to be climate focused. If you're working on a website for an amazing campaign, this is climate work, even though you're not doing the actual climate research. But there's so many different aspects, and this is my main piece of advice to go out to all young people out there just like us.
Yes, and Sustainable is also recruiting right now. So if you want to join us, please contact us or ClimaTalk, whichever you want to join. To wrap this up, thank you so much, Emma, for us today. And we really appreciate having you today for sharing your insights on such a dynamic and rapidly evolving field. Thank you to all the Sustainable listeners for tuning in this week with us. We would love to hear from you for other episode or any feedback. Please contact us through messaging on Instagram at sustainable_GAH or email us on sustainable@gmail.com. See you next time.